Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Byte-Sized HR powered by One. I'm your host Loic, and today we are joined by Toby Sinclair, the founder of Toby Sinclair Coaching Limited. Today we'll explore how AI is influencing leadership, enhancing business strategies, and transforming employee experience. That's the title, Managed by Robots, Leadership in the Age of AI. First of all, Toby, thank you very much for joining us on this podcast.
Nice
Excited
to
to
see
hear
you.
your perspective on these different questions. But let's jump straight into it because I also want to give a shout out to Zaid for getting us in contact in the first place. For our audience, if you haven't already heard, we do have an episode with her, which I highly recommend checking out. But thanks to her, I got the chance of speaking with you, which is a good backbone to kind of go back to the fact that before starting your own business, which congrats on that and all the best. You used to work as well at JP Morgan. So that's the first question to kind of get us into the better understanding your background. Can you walk us through your decision to leave JP Morgan and start your own venture? What was the catalyst for this significant change?
Yeah, of course. So yeah, at JP Morgan, I was an employee experience director. So it's basically working on optimizing the experience of the employees. Last 2, 3 years, I worked primarily in employee onboarding, so helping new hires join the organization. And it was a fascinating experience working at such a large organization. Just on the onboarding side, JP
Mhm.
Morgan brought in about 100,000 employees a year. So it's like crazy scale. But I think there's a couple of catalysts for me that led to me leaving JP. One of them was moving out of London. So I got to the point where I wanted to start a family. And living in the city, as many of your listeners will know, is sometimes very challenging. So I actually moved back to the northwest of England to be near family, bought a house, had a child. And really, it was that point where I was having to do quite a long commute and stay over 2 or 3 nights a week down in London, because that's where obviously JP Morgan's based. And with the drive to get people back into the office, I was like, this is not going to work for me anymore, in the sense that I wanted to be at home with my son primarily. So really the catalyst was, I guess, moving out of the city, having a family, and me wanting to spend more time with my son, especially in these early years. He's now 2 years old, keeping me super busy. So that was really the catalyst, was to be at home. But there was also, I guess, a second catalyst which was I've always wanted to run and start my own business, in particular to build a product. So that really gave me the opportunity to start to do that, really. So yes, a personal catalyst around my family, but also a professional catalyst about having the opportunity to go build a product and a business.
Brilliant. And it's super important to find that balance between the two, the professional and the personal side. So,
Mm.
best of luck there. There's a lot happening for you. Happy to hear that. And moving forward a bit to kind of connect it as well with our topic. And a side note, I feel like when you mentioned what JP Morgan is currently utilizing in terms of pushing their remote employees to come back to the office, I feel that that's a hot topic to also discuss on a podcast these days. Because
Yeah,
I don't know if you've heard a bit, Twitter and so on, their approaches in regards to that. So there's a lot happening as well there. So I'm pretty sure we could definitely potentially have a discussion on that moving forward in the future. But so let's make sure we stick to the topic. So better understanding this, how have your experiences in various roles from software development to executive leadership influenced your approach to coaching and business strategies?
yeah. So I was in corporate roles for about 17 years. When I first graduated from university, I worked as a software developer for about 8 years. So worked predominantly on writing code, building products, and doing software work for those 8 years. What I found as my career developed, I kind of got to this point where I started to identify a pattern that most of the challenges with building products and creating business outcomes are really associated to the people, not to the technology. I know it sounds stereotypical, but I really had
Mhm.
this realization that I spent a lot of time developing my technical skills, but really found that to unlock performance, it was really about the human skills that I needed to develop. And I became hugely fascinated by the relationships between teams, how to create high performing teams, how to develop better skills as a leader around coaching, listening, And that sort of sent me down a journey of learning how to be a better coach, better leader. But what's interesting, especially with the work that I'm doing now, is it's really starting to converge some of those together, both the technical skills and the human skills. And I think we see this in today's topic, which is an interesting opportunity for us all, is how can we use artificial intelligence, not necessarily to replace us, but to enable us to be better leaders and deploy those human skills assisted by machines, essentially. And that's really what I'm really fascinated by, given my technical background and also my investment in sort of developing coaching skills. How can we bring those together? And I think artificial intelligence provides a really interesting way to allow us to start to turn that into reality.
Yeah, how to leverage it, I feel, is really the key here. And we do have a question as well in regards to how people look at it in terms of enhancement or threat. But just to kind of dig further into that and starting off in regards to AI for performance management as a topic of example, but people managers admit to using AI for performance review and feedback. Research finds that half of people managers in the UK alone have used generative AI tools in their roles. Research by Vizia has revealed. Of course, we'll be linking all those different sources at the end of the podcast. But should people managers use AI for performance review, as what we are discussing end of the year? So I think it's a good moment to highlight that.
Yeah, it's a fascinating topic around the use of AI for performance management. And I'd kind of break the performance management down into kind of two parts. And this was definitely my experience at JP Morgan and other companies, is there's typically two parts to the performance management side. There is the administrative part. So most large organizations have a system where the manager and the employee have to go in, they do a written report against different competencies around what they have done, haven't done, areas to improve. And I know from my experience and other managers, this can be quite a high administrative overhead. At one point, I was managing around 20 employees. So it literally took me weeks and hours to actually do all of the written write-ups. And as a manager, you obviously want to do that in an effective way, but often it can be a real burden to actually write out these performance reviews. And that's where I'm seeing a lot of managers are turning to generative AI tools like ChatGPT to help them write those performance reviews, to actually take some of that administrative burden. The challenge with that, I think, is that the positive of writing the performance review is it really acts as a way for the manager to reflect on the year and kind of think through the performance of their employee. So when you don't do that and you just give it to a machine, then you're maybe not doing that thinking process. The second thing is if you're using AI tools to write the performance review, it can end up writing something super generic that maybe does apply, doesn't it? It's not specific enough, right? So the employee that's reading it might sort of get a sense that that kind of explains the year, but doesn't really. So I think there's a real challenge with that. And then I think the second one, which is even more interesting, is, as I said, the first part we've got is the administrative work around performance management. The second part is the conversation, which is the conversation between the employee and the manager. Where does AI play a role in that? Now, some people will obviously, their initial reaction is you can't use AI for that, right? You don't want to turn up to a performance review and have a avatar speaking as an AI robot giving you your performance from the end of the year. That would be terrible, right? But I think there are ways in which managers can use AI to practice and plan for the conversation. So I think the use of role plays is particularly effective in helping the manager think through different angles around performance, especially if they need to work with an employee that maybe has been underperforming or might be a difficult conversation. So using AI to kind of simulate some of those scenarios, work through objections, think through how they might start the conversation. I think AI can be very, very useful there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like how you kind of emphasize it here, and also the not to forget that human touch, right? We're using AI to support us, to help us, to build it and make it a bit easier for these tasks. But we should not remove that human approach, human touch that we have to it. And as mentioned before, and I guess there is also quite an important question in regards to the resistance towards AI, considering the resistance to AI with over 73% of HR leaders reporting it. What strategies have you found effective in cultivating a culture that embraces AI as a tool for enhancements rather than a threat?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's a couple of things that spring to mind. I think the first one, linking back to the previous question,
Mhm.
is being transparent about how you have or haven't used AI. So I think the best managers will be super transparent with their teams to say, look, I wrote your performance review, but to help refine it, I used an AI tool to help kind of make it clearer, because I'm not the best at kind of writing this stuff out. And I think the best managers won't hide that. They'll actually be transparent with their employees. And I think that transparency isn't a bad thing, because then it opens a conversation with their employees. So I think the first thing is just managers not hiding this, but being transparent. The challenge with that is some organizations are fearful around these technologies. So I think there is a tendency for some of this to be hidden away. So that stat you shared earlier around half of managers using AI as part of performance management. It's interesting how
Mhm.
many of those are doing it as like a hidden thing rather than
Yeah, yeah,
openly, transparently
absolutely.
doing it. I think the other thing that I found very effective in terms of cultivating a culture that embraces AI is hackathons. Really, really good.
Mhm.
So actually doing events that bring a diverse set of the organization together to go through that process of ideation, experimentation, and testing out ideas. And actually, like, I think the key to that is how you bring a diverse set of the organization together, from senior managers to frontline workers, and then allow them just to experiment, fail, and explore this in a very rapid way, is a great way of actually identifying really good use cases that can then be taken away, built upon further, and also helps demystify the whole thing around AI. So yeah, hackathons is a really, really nice way. And it's fun as well, right? So it kind of helps
Mhm.
people experiment with the technology in a really fun and effective way that often leads to some really great ideas that can move the business forward.
Absolutely, and I think it's a good connection as well to the third segment that we're going to be digging into the AI's role in leadership and training specifically. But recent report highlights that 88% of HR professionals see significant benefits of AI in training programs, for instance. You as a leader, how do you integrate AI to enhance coaching and leadership training?
Yeah, so I think the one problem space that AI is really good at for this is
Mhm.
making learning stick. So one of the traditional challenges with learning is this idea around, you go into a classroom for a day or 2 days, you learn a bunch of stuff, a bunch of knowledge and information. A good example that I've done a lot of work around is challenging conversations. So you spend a day or two learning around how to lead challenging conversations. You learn the models, the frameworks, the approaches. Then you go back into the workplace and it's like, oh, now the reality kind of hits of how do I start to use this information, and learners can feel really overwhelmed. And it's
Yeah.
also very easy just to forget what you were taught, because as soon as the training ends, you start forgetting what you learned. Where AI can play a really good part in learning is providing tools and exercises that allow the learners to practice learning after the sessions. So taking that example around challenging conversations, giving learners tools that allow them to continue practicing challenging conversations through role plays, skills exercises after the training concludes. And it's really the kind of metaphor I use often is that when, particularly around conversations, many of us will practice those conversations in front of the mirror. And really, AI provides a digital mirror that allows us to practice, talk, and prepare for those kind of difficult conversations. I think that's just like one example, really, where AI can be hugely effective in, like I said, taking the knowledge, turning it into action, and ultimately make the learning stick by helping leaders develop those habits and behaviors that we're often looking for when we come out of a training course.
Absolutely. And I really love that example that you just provided of utilizing ChatGPT kind of or AI in general, kind of as that second person that you can train with, test out before you actually apply it in real life, right? And there's definitely point of leverage on that. But to a certain extent, we do have to look at also at the aspect that, AI sometimes is questioned on the aspect of ethical and effectiveness, which is kind of the question now is addressing AI skepticism is crucial given the biases and potential resistance from teams. How can leaders ensure AI integration is both ethical and effective?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And I think there's probably two others. The way I describe it is any AI tool that you're using, you need to do it ethically, legally, and safely.
Yeah.
And this is a real dilemma for a lot of organizations in terms of how do they build their AI governance to ensure those things. And I think there's a couple of different ways. There are now government regulation that's coming into the space. So there is an EU AI Act that has recently been created and has now, I think, gone live, which provides
Okay.
guidance to companies, organizations around the things that they need to adhere to. And they have different risk levels, and certain things fall into different risk
Wow.
levels. And if you're in a
Yeah.
higher risk, you have to go through a process to be assessed and make sure you're doing all that kind of stuff. So I think that's one angle which organizations need to be aware of. I think the second is updating any of their internal policies around this in terms of how data is used. And again, making those transparent both to the employees and customers around how you're doing that. A lot of organizations are now creating what's called a responsible AI policy that really
Okay.
describes how they use AI tools, what they do and don't do, and making that transparent. I think the problem, though, is as we all know, we see these like terms and conditions, policy documents. Many of us don't read them. So there is an additional challenge of how you then educate both
Mhm.
your employees and your customers around those so that they're aware of how the data is being used, what tools are and aren't being used.
Thanks for the input. I honestly had no idea about this new AI structure that they were EU structure that they were building.
Yeah, yeah.
That's quite interesting.
There's a lot of documentation where you can kind of
Mhm.
understand some of the things. And like I said, in summary, it's like based upon a categorization. So certain
Yeah.
things higher risk, certain things are lower risk, and the higher the risk is, the more kind of things you need to do to ensure you're doing it ethically, legally, and sort of safely.
So the structure is kind of the one that brings the answer to the question of having that ethical aspect. Yeah, no, completely agree, and it's glad to see more organization are leveraging that approach and creating. Instead of saying, no to AI, let's just build a structure around it. Let's train people on how to use it properly in a way that's ethical and effective. Let's go back a bit, utilizing your experience at JP Morgan and look into the strategic application of AI in business, after all. But in light of your experience with AI at JP Morgan, could you share how AI can be leveraged not just in HR, but across different business functions to streamline operation and decision making? I think, frankly, I think what I like about this question is we know you can leverage AI in different business functions, but there's still that aspect of how do you do that in a streamlined kind of approach?
Yeah. So yeah, obviously there is an unendless number of opportunities that we could look for
Yep.
to apply AI. As I said earlier, hackathons are a really great way to surface those problems, pain points that leaders are having. I think one of the things I worked on where we identified as a good way to sort of look at this is around time. Where are the inefficiencies in the organization? Where is the time being spent that could be now automated and use AI for, right? And obviously that is a place where people are using AI to make things more efficient. As we talked about earlier, that might be writing performance reviews or speeding that up.
Mhm.
But obviously there is also that question of, is that the right thing? Is it the ethical thing we should do? Is it the
Yeah.
right thing for the employee? But that can be often a good angle when we look across the business, is where are the inefficiencies? Where are we spending lots of time, and how might we speed up the process using AI? And then the second thing, as more of an opportunity, is how can we get more intelligence into our employees to make better decisions? So the really simple example of that is meetings and summarization of meetings. We're all probably familiar with that idea of all of our days are spent going from meeting to meeting to meeting, but
Yep.
we don't have that time to like reflect and understand and think about what was discussed. AI can provide that intelligence because through simple summaries, it allows you to kind of recall what was talked about, get more intelligence. So that can ultimately help to make better decisions as well.
That's a good point. I think we're all quite familiar with those. What are they called? Those secondary recorders that you have on Teams, Zoom,
Yeah.
etc., where they take notes, everything. It's honestly, it's a fantastic technology. But we looked at it from the structure point of view, the training point of view, the implementation, the looking at it not from not pushing it away, but kind of accepting it that it's there and how to leverage it. But we're humans. There's going to be mistakes. There's going to be faults, and therefore, it is important to kind of look at what are some common pitfalls or challenges leaders should be aware of when implementing AI-driven strategies in the organizations.
Yeah, I think one of the ones I'm very passionate about and I've seen a lot is where organizations don't take an experience or a journey perspective to these things. And when
Okay.
so this is a passion for me because, like I said, I spent a lot of time over the last few years around the employee onboarding experience, which
Mhm.
when you start to map it out is a really complex end-to-end journey that spans many, many different departments, whether that's technology, HR, real estate, security, has many, many different actors in it, the hiring manager, the new hire, support staff. And when you start to look across this end-to-end journey, it allows you to see where there are the real opportunities and also design an experience that is seamless, effective, and efficient for all of the actors across that experience. Now, that's when it's done well, organizations map out and understand their end-to-end journey and identify the pain points across that, which then feeds
Yep.
into the decision, can AI be used here or not? The challenge is a lot of organizations don't do that. And what they do instead is they just work within their individual silos and identify problems to be solved. The worst case scenario that can happen is you end up with an end-to-end journey that has about 6 different chatbots in it, 10 different reports, and multiple different tools, which makes it a very disjointed experience for either the customer or the employee that's going through that end-to-end journey. And I have seen firsthand this problem of having multiple chatbots. You have a chatbot for this kind of thing, and then there's a different chatbot for another step of the journey, and then there's another chatbot. And this gets even more complicated when you're
That's a
working with
mess.
external partners as well, right? And each of these
Yeah.
things a slightly different experience. So really, I think the pitfall that organizations need to avoid is solving these in their silos rather than looking at the end-to-end experience. And I think that's why I said when I talked about the hackathon idea, the key thing of having a diverse cross-section of your organization to help break down those silos and find the business opportunities and then deploy them in a way that optimizes that experience for the users, personas that you're working with.
Definitely. Well, I hope our listeners have taken note in regards to that, specifically those decision makers, because yeah, there's a lot happening. I feel AI kind of I wouldn't say surprised us, but has been speeding up, ramping up much quicker than we could have potentially anticipated in terms of how organizations are leveraging it, how it's implemented, and so on. Which kind of brings me to those last two questions. Toby, thank you so very much for all this key information that you provided. But looking forward, what emerging trends in AI do you believe will have the most significant impact on leadership and business strategies?
Yeah, I think I probably got two examples. The first one
Mhm.
is voice and video. So it's the channel in which we engage with AI. Today, many of us are kind of familiar with this idea of, obviously, ChatGPT is over the
Yeah.
last couple of years, but primarily around text-based interaction. I think what's just emerging now with OpenAI recently launching advanced voice mode is we're going to now see the emergence of voice being the primary channel for engaging with AI agents. So on my desk here, I have an Alexa that I often talk to, play songs, etc. I think we're going to see more of that in our home lives in terms of AI being integrated into more of our voice devices. But I think we're also going to see that in the workplace, where I have this kind of picture of the future where you have like an Alexa listening type device in the corner of your meeting room that's listening in, and you can actually turn to it and say, hey, can you just summarize our conversation for the last 5 minutes? Or, hey, what are we missing in this conversation? What haven't we talked about? So you can use it as a voice activated assistant in the room. And I think that is going to be the next big channel. And then beyond that, I think video is going to emerge as well, right? And we might in the future even see the convergence of some of the virtual reality, the metaverse stuff that was very, very
Yeah.
popular
Yeah.
3 or 4 years ago, which has kind of died down. But I feel like there's still investments being made in that. And I think at some point there's going to be a convergence around that. And then the second one, which is probably less, what's the word, sexy or interesting, is
Exciting.
around regulation, right? I think
Mhm.
that is going to be something that is going to come more and more. I think there's going to be more of these situations where maybe there's errors, failures, things go wrong. And governments obviously are paying very close attention to this technology. And I believe there's going to be more and more regulation that comes in, which hopefully will be a very positive thing because it protects the rights of our
Exactly.
employees, our customers, and helps society as a whole. But that is, I think, another thing that's going to emerge in the coming years and become more and more prevalent.
Yeah, definitely. It can't just be a sandbox. There's got to be some form of protection as well. But I think it's completely agree in regards to that. Toby, our final question. I feel like time has pretty much just flown by, but let's talk a bit about with your new business that you're launching yourself into. How does your coaching model incorporate these trends to prepare leaders for the future challenges and opportunities presented by AI?
Yeah, so at the moment, I'm focused on a product. So I've got an AI platform that allows leaders to plan, prepare for difficult conversations. So it's all
Okay.
about making difficult conversations easier. So that the way we do that is through realistic role plays. So creating simulations that allow leaders to practice difficult conversations. They might be things around underperformance. There might be things around team conflict. There's even examples around employees with bad body odor. How do you have that conversation? Surprisingly comes up a lot.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. I've
Wow.
worked with many managers, and one of the conversations they fear is when they need to deal with things around like hygiene related stuff.
Yeah.
Is quite challenging, right? Because you don't in all of
Totally.
these conversations you want to do it in a way that is both kind and direct, and getting that combination is quite challenging. Often leaders will try and maybe be too empathetic and skirt around issues and not be direct enough. Other leaders might be too direct and then not nice enough or kind enough. So all of the tools that I'm developing help leaders really have these conversations both with kindness and directness. And as I said earlier, it's really about providing that mirror, but in a digital way that allows leaders to practice, plan, and prepare for these scary conversations so that they can have more confidence, clarity, and competence in delivering those really important conversations that ultimately do have a business impact, in the sense that when leaders fail to execute well in those difficult conversations, or in like performance management conversations that we shared earlier, they're the things that last for the employee. If you don't show up and execute well in those crucial moments for employees, they're often the times where the employee leaves the conversation and thinks, you know what, I've had enough of this, I'm going to go look for another job. So it's a really important skill that often leaders don't do. And many of us, I think there's like research that shows 70% of leaders are avoiding a conversation they know they should have. And that is the default for many leaders, is avoiding those conversations. So what I'm really trying to do is stop leaders avoiding them and go in those conversations and actually execute the conversations well.
Brilliant. Toby, thank you very much for all the detailed information that you shared with us. Of course, in regards to your business, we'll gladly as well link it there. Make sure to follow, check out Toby Sinclair's LinkedIn profile. I have to say, one of the most active users I see on LinkedIn these days. There's a lot of enriching information that you've been sharing. So thanks for sharing those inputs as well with us. But really a true pleasure having you on this podcast today. Of course, a big thank you as well to our listeners.